Okay, so thank you guys so much for coming. This is the Intentional Support and Programming for Freshmen and Transfer Student-Athletes. My name is Jordy St. Pierre. I'm a graduate assistant working with football. And those presenting this topic will be Ms. Kirsten Peterman and Ms. Morgan Jackson. Before we get started, if you do want to activate live captioning, you can select live transcript and then show subtitles. Additionally, the presenters have requested that all questions be held to the end, but if you would like to submit them in the chat box so you don't forget, you're more than happy to do that as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Ms. Kirsten and Ms. Morgan.
Well, thank you, Jordy. Thank you everyone for being here. We're really excited to give this presentation today on intentional support and programming for freshmen and transfer student athletes, two populations of our student athletes that we really try to hone in on and support. So we're gonna tell you a little bit more about that. But before we get to the presentation, we're just gonna take a few minutes to introduce ourselves, who we are, how we got here, and what we're doing now. So if I can get to the next slide. Thank you.
There we go.
Perfect. So I'm going to let Morgan introduce herself first.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Morgan Jackson. I'm the Assistant Academic Advisor. I'm currently with football. And so kind of got here and not the most straight and narrow path. So it all started when I was a student athlete tutor at University of South Alabama during my grad school years, in which I was studying clinical mental health counseling. After that experience, I decided I wanted to work more with student athlete population intentionally in the mental health aspect. So from there, graduated, became a sports counselor at University of Buffalo, did that for a year and decided I wanted to use my skills more in the academic realm. And so that brought me here back to LSU, where I did my undergrad as the present day assistant academic advisor.
And I'm Kirsten Peterman, academic advisor with football currently. I'm an international student, or I was an international student athlete, competed as a gymnast at the University of Maryland, College Park from 2016 through to 2020, got my undergraduate degree in kinesiology in 3 years, and then started my master's also in kinesiology, which was a 2-year program from 2019 to 2021. During that time, throughout my master's, I was a teaching assistant for a year. And then I really wanted to, similar to Morgan, kind of get into more of the mental health space, but decided to look at the field of academics in a different light, not as a student athlete and on the other side of things. So I was fortunate enough to start in a role at my alma mater at the University of Maryland as the academic management intern, more of an administrative position. And then due to a significant amount of turnover, I was able to step in as the assistant athletic academic counselor at that time for our women's soccer program and men's and women's golf program at the University of Maryland. And then I was fortunate enough to step into what is my current role as the academic advisor for football here at LSU.
Okay, so pick this quote because it really, I think, sums up essentially what we're doing when it comes to our programming and intentional support for our student athletes. And so really, and you'll hear us say it throughout the presentation, it has a lot to do with foundation, making sure they have a solid one as they go through their time here at LSU, whether they're transfers, freshmen, or whomever, just making sure that they have a solid foundation to work with and to build upon. And so a brief overview of what we'll talk about today. We'll kind of talk about the background, the why, where these programs came from. We'll go into a little bit of detail about our freshman and our transfer programming, the issues that are being solved through our programming, and then kind of give a framework of how to go about building your own program, intentional program with your student athletes, and then of course, time for questions.
Awesome. So when it comes to the background, just looking at the why behind these programs, this wasn't something that was set in stone when Morgan and I had both gotten here to LSU. It's really been a building process in a new format that we've taken on within our football academic advising space, which has been a really good growth opportunity for us. And I think it's been great for our students. And so when you're looking at the why of the program, two things that we kind of noticed with our freshman population, and it's with student athletes all across the country, and honestly with students that aren't athletes all across the country, but general trends look at the lack of academic preparedness, especially coming out of COVID, and looking at where our student athletes are coming in and really having to meet them where they're at. So wanting to make sure that we have a program that addresses that concern, if you will. Also, increased mental health concerns among students in general, but especially among student athletes that are balancing so much more than academics, more than their sport, all the nuances that are, joining the athletics world of NIL and whatnot. So also wanting to address mental health concerns. In the transfer population, obviously adjusting to a new academic space and expectations, because it's not going to be the exact same as their prior institution. And so having them come in maybe with some habits that, maybe need to be adjusted and looking at those new expectations. And then also a sense of belonging, finding their place at a new institution with new teammates, with the new coaching staff, with the new support staff. All of those things are relevant to that transfer population. And honestly, when it comes to the freshmen and the transfer populations, a lot of those are interchangeable. So what we're seeing with our transfers, our freshmen are also experiencing that too. And so those are the whys behind some of those programming. And then by being able to focus on these specific populations, especially with the rise in transfers, it helps to build effective habits, which can really address and increase APR and GSR rates that we're looking at, honing in on and having be the top of the top in our academic space. So that brings us to the FAST program. This is our first year academic support through transition program. I specifically work with our freshman student athletes that come in. So I'm the advisor for all the freshmen. And this is kind of my baby, if you will, when it comes to programming. So I'm going to dive into it and kind of give you the why and some of the components. So our first year academic support program is designated for our first year football student athletes with the intention of ensuring that they are supported academically, professionally, as well as personally throughout their transition from high school to college. And so obviously that's a very critical transition that they're going through, and making sure that we're not only focusing on their academic transition, but it's more to that. When we're thinking about the holistic approach, it's professional, it's personal. So when we think about what's going into this, and Morgan said it before, we're really focused on the strong foundation, but there's a lot of things that need to go in to build that strong foundation. So we're ultimately focused on the structure that we're providing them, as well as the support. So there's a lot of components to it, and I'll break them down individually, but we have our student athlete orientation that all of our freshman student athletes go through, but we kind of sometimes mix it up for our football student athletes. Everyone goes through our learning profile. And then we have our summer bridge program, which is our summer academic success program, or SASP. The ALEX, I'll explain it further, but it's our math placement test, Tiger Cubs or study hall for our freshman student athletes, our student athlete with a game plan or SWAG program that focuses on professional development, weekly check-in meetings, as well as a first year portfolio project. So breaking down these components, our student athlete orientation has transformed a lot from being a 1 day, 2 hour, throw all this information at you type of orientation to a week-long orientation, which we piloted this past semester, and it proved to be very successful because we were able to break things down and include a lot more in that orientation. And so it begins with the introduction of our staff and our services. We go through how to use certain technology because each school is different. We currently use Moodle, but some schools use Canvas or Blackboard. And so really explaining that technology so that they're off on the right foot, going through our policies within our academic center so that they're aware of those, and then the completion of any necessary forms. So like our major declaration forms or anything that we need to get done in that first week. But we also use that student athlete orientation to bring in guest speakers to talk to our student athletes. And so our Tiger Life program is more of our life skills, professional development, that kind of stuff. So we had them come in to talk to our student athletes. Another really cool thing that we did on the last day of our orientation is we did a little Q&A for our freshman student athletes. We had quite a few mid-year football student athletes this year. And so we had our older freshmen that had been here for a semester kind of be on the other side of things and take some questions from the new freshmen and kind of give their experience and their advice to these new freshmen to not only, answer their questions, but also build that sense of community for those new freshmen. When it comes to our learning profiles, that's basically an assessment that we use to gauge academic strengths and or weaknesses, or places where our student athletes may have gaps. And so results indicate whether or not further psychoeducational testing is suggested or required. And there are many components of this learning profile, including reading, writing, math components. And so making sure that all of our student athletes are going through this as soon or, relatively quickly to when they get here so that we can set them up with the right services to be successful. When it comes to our Summer Bridge program or Summer Academic Success program, it's basically designed to help our first year student athletes that arrive in the summer adapt to the college environment and really jumpstart their careers academically by taking classes and then also going through workshops to basically obtain the skills that they need to help them balance academics and their other responsibilities when it comes to athletics. And so really giving them that pilot approach in the summer so that when the fall rolls around, they're kind of ready to go and they understand everything that goes into, balancing things as a student athlete. So our math requirements have changed quite a bit here. And so we really made it a focus for our student athletes to take our math placement test, which is the ALEX, especially for our student athletes that want to pursue a degree in business or a degree in engineering. And so our student athletes will take the web-based and proctored math placement test if they need to for their major to make sure that they're basically being in the right courses at the right time. So we're not putting anything behind. So they have 5 attempts and we make sure that, they're prepared. We have a math specialist here that if they need to get some extra sessions in with our math specialist to prepare them, that they are taking advantage of that resource as well. Our academic support plan and study hall is basically every single day for an hour. Our first semester freshman student athletes are coming in for an hour each day and working in small groups with a strategy tutor or a learning specialist or a graduate assistant. They're using task sheets to make sure that they're staying on track with all their assignments, that they know how to prioritize assignments for the week and they're getting stuff done productively. And so for that first semester, we're for sure doing 5 days a week for an hour. And then we're trying to, for that next semester, when they're in their second semester of their freshman year, kind of go towards that academically independent approach if we possibly can. And so dropping them down to 3 hours Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Obviously, that is an individual approach too. So not each student athlete is going to be the same, just kind of gauging that there. And then with our student with a game plan model, that's more when we focus on the personal and professional development of our student athletes. And so in place of our study hall, twice per month, we have guest speakers come in to talk to our first semester freshman student athletes on topics that'll allow them to expand their network, expand their life skills, grow and be successful during their time as well as after their time at LSU. And so some examples that we've used in the past have been missions, visions, and values, taking the time to really take themselves outside of the academic space and the football space to focus on what they're passionate about and what their mission is in life past sport. Another thing that we have done in the past is have alumni come back to talk about their experience. We've had people come in to talk about media training and public speaking. So just those different things that they might not necessarily get on a daily basis or that they might not think about to do on their own. We're giving them that structure to, again, focus on things more than just the academics, focus on the professional and the personal growth and development of our student athletes. Then we're still going. We have check-in meetings. I personally meet with all of our first semester freshman student athletes each week for about 15 minutes. They have their certain times and of the day that they come and see me. And so we meet for 15 minutes just to go over their grades, any assignments that they've missed or that they've done really well on, making sure that we're staying up to date on those and having constant communication. We're going over and discussing academic highlights, academic concerns. We're advising for the upcoming semesters, chatting about major selection, if there's any, kind of uncertainty of what major the student athlete wants to pursue, just a built-in time for us to go over that and communicate. We're also setting and reviewing goals constantly, especially through that first year when we're trying to build that solid foundation and stick to those. And then for my second semester freshmen, we do on a bi-weekly basis. And so again, trying to go towards that academically independent approach, but also still checking in. Another piece of that as well is I like to personalize my meetings a little bit and focus more on like the self-care aspects and the mental health approach as well, just because that's something for me that I have a passion in. And so just doing little check-ins of like, if you were to explain how you're feeling based on the weather, how would you be feeling? And just kind of get them to think outside the box and be creative a little bit throughout those meetings. And then the last aspect of the FAST program is the first year portfolio project. And so again, trying to have them focus on things outside of academics and setting themselves up for success personally and professionally as well. And so creating a resume, establishing a resume so that they have that as a basis for years to come. A lot of times they have to create one for class anyways. And so if they're creating that in their first year, they have that. It's something that they can use to build on moving forward. Completing goals, we do that in our check-in meetings every single semester. So that's something that they're doing. It's not something that they have to do on their own. We've kind of taken a backseat on it this semester, but in the summer, the freshmen made a vision board, again, focusing on their mission, their vision, where they want to be, where they've come from, and what their path looks like. Setting up a LinkedIn account to start that networking process, and then also taking the time to find an individual in their desired career field and network with them, learn about the career so that, at the end of the day, when their sport is over and they have their degree in their hand, they know what they're walking into in terms of a career, or they can kind of explore that and see what they like and what they don't like. And then just, writing a quick report on that or giving a little presentation. That is everything that goes into that first year portfolio project. And we try not to let it take away from the academic time.
Killed it. All right. And so really following up from Kirsten, the SCORE program was born. And so it is a new 1 semester program for our transfer student athletes. That was kind of birthed out of having so many student athletes that came in mid-year. I think we have 10 undergraduate transfers. And so the associate director for football academics came up with a great idea of having their own kind of transition program to help them. And so each letter of the acronym kind of stands for something they should be getting or gaining out of this experience. So support, collaboration, opportunity, a chance to recharge, and to educate. And so again, the SCORE program sets out to provide that academic support for our transfer student athletes, allowing them to just have a smooth transition from their previous institution in a holistic way to give them a firm foundation, just not academically, but like even personally, and just having, again, a smooth transition from a different institution, because that can be hard. And so these are all the SCORE components. So not as many as the FAST in the freshmen. And I think that's intentional too, just knowing that everyone is at a unique place with their collegiate and academic career. And so making sure we're very intentional in trying to hone in on what would be most important for them, while also giving them their academic independence, because we know they've done it before. So they are also included in the student athlete orientation that we have, the learning profile. They have their own study hall hours, their weekly check-ins, and then they have academic workshops and a resource page for all the academic workshops we have. And so we'll kind of dive into a little bit more of those. And so since Kirsten did such a great job explaining these two, we won't go into deep detail, but student athlete orientation, they essentially do it at the same time as the freshmen. So the mid-years, they did it the week-long one that this past spring. And so they got to meet with SAA, which is Student Advocacy and Accountability. They met with sports psych. So just really putting faces to names, getting to know different services on campus, as well as all the other components Kirsten mentioned. And then they also do the learning profile. So within the first couple of weeks, really making it a point for them to get that testing done to see if they would need any further testing and where we kind of need to go from there. So those are pretty similar with the FAST program. So weekly study hall, they have essentially, ideally it's 3 days. Some have 2 to 3 days a week. And so it is structured study hall time. Again, because we know they're all at different points in their academic career, there is some flexibility there. So whether it's because of schedules or what may be going on, they're there 2 to 3 days a week for an hour, in which they work in small groups. And since it was about 10 of them, usually they're in just 2 different groups, or on some days it might be one whole group because of the numbers. And so they're working with strategy tutors, or sometimes learning specialists will come down and work with them. And that's just intentional time for them to work on anything they have going on. And so I'll kind of talk a little bit more about how that came to be and what they are getting out of that, because again, they're very much academically inclined. They've done college before. And so it's sometimes having to have a different perspective of what study hall looks like for me and what I'm getting done during that time. But either way, it is intentional time for them to take out to get things done academically. So they all have weekly check-in meetings in which most will meet with me, myself, or our GA, and to just kind of check in, similar to the freshmen at 15 to 30 minutes. We're doing a lot of academic, reviewing grades, assignments, task sheets, but a lot of it also focused on just the transition, making sure I was intentional in checking in with them, how the transition has been, personally, athletically, and academically. And so for mine and my check-in meetings, I like to make sure we are setting goals every semester with that. So setting one personal goal, one academic goal, and one athletic goal, just to make sure, again, we want to produce well-rounded young adults and individuals, and for them to be able to realize each of those components. So if they get it nowhere else, they get it in here with us, of being able to have that balance and supporting them in balancing all that they have going on. And then the big component is their academic workshops. So bi-weekly, I think they've had 8 this semester. They have academic workshops that, again, they've all been in college before, but it's really just to more so help enhance their academic skills and to introduce them to helpful on-campus resources. And so we've partnered with internal staff as well as on-campus staff, which helps to continue to strengthen campus relationships. So we had a plagiarism 101 workshop where student advocacy and accountability came in and said all the things that kind of went into that, what happens when you get reported, things like that, how to avoid it, as well as LSU libraries that came in and talked to them about proper citation and kind of how to avoid it, because sometimes it's not intentional. And so just kind of giving them the skills that they need, everything they need to know and how it works here at LSU. We've done internal ones. So we had an internal staff member do one on navigating online classes, since that's become a way bigger way to do classes these days, and just how to navigate it here at LSU, what it looks like on Moodle, how to work our Moodle with fully online classes. We've done one on effective writing, where we brought in our writing center from on campus, which they truly enjoyed and on campus enjoyed, just being able to see the student athletes and see like what they kind of need help with. And for them, again, just to enhance that academic toolbox and to have that firm foundation here at LSU that may have been different from their previous institution. So along with our academic workshops is our Canvas Hub. And so with the help of a lot of internal staff, we were able to create our own little Canvas page for the academic workshop. So we wanted them to get it in the workshop, but wanted to make sure they had a place that they can go back and have all this really useful information, because we know 50 minutes in a workshop is not going to change everything, and we can't always remember everything. And so essentially the screenshot you see here is the kind of mock-up of what it looks like. So for each workshop that they had a module on Canvas where they can go and access, whether it's the presentation, the resources that the presenters brought with them, and we attempted to do a lot of follow-up assignments for them. And so not only did we want to present the information, but we wanted to make sure we had a way to solidify that information for them. And so after every workshop, they were tasked with just a little mini assignment to complete, following up from that workshop. And so it really helps, especially with in study hall, when there's those, I don't have anything to do, I'm done for the week. And it's like, great. So you can go, you can do your follow-up assignment. And again, it's just kind of to solidify everything that they learned. And the nice part about it is they can download anything from the Canvas website, so they can, in the future, if they forget their Canvas login or they're done with score, they can have those resources for themselves. And so we do, I think Kirsten mentioned it too, weekly task sheets for them. And so in that, we kind of piloted having them upload their task sheets through Canvas, just to kind of have a one-stop shop for them. So they can go in there, they can download the task sheet, have it on paper, upload it electronically, kind of whatever works for them. And so the Canvas Hub just is kind of like a one and all. It's a catch-all for everything we have. And so just another way to make sure they are getting what they need and have access to resources, whether we're open or not. So they have that. Okay, and so that kind of wraps up what our programming looks like with FAST and SCORE. And so in this, we are these are the issues that are being resolved, the benefits of our program. Again, that firm foundation, we're really trying to hone, whether it's freshmen, whether it's transfers, we are establishing a firm foundation of habits and skills to be successful academically. We're increasing the engagement, the attention that's placed on academics, but even just being able to engage with those working in academics, their teammates, things like that, keeping them interested and engaged is really important, and kind of has a connection that they have these things to do, but also knowing like, oh, there's people that are here to support me, there's things in place. And so just overall keeping them engaged in their academics. And then, of course, the adjustment piece is, I think, the underlying piece that any of these programs are trying to establish, helping them to adjust to through this transition, whether it's as a freshman going from high school to college or going from one institution to another one, are really hard transition periods. And so making sure we're intentional of seeing these populations and helping them out as much as possible, because it can be scary. Okay, and so now that we've kind of talked about our intentional programs, we want to put together just some steps of kind of a framework of where you can begin and kind of how we started getting these programs together. And so we say step one would be assessing our needs. And so you want to talk about first your target population, whether they're freshmen, whether they're transfers, whether it's mid-year specifically, summer specific, whether it's just high-risk student athletes in general. So really, where are you targeting this program? What population? What does that population look like? Is there a big age gap? Do you have where transfers can be from like 18 to that like early 20s mark, or is it all freshmen where they're in that 17, 18? So kind of having all those details panned out. We want to kind of think about our common struggles, whether they're institutional, our student athlete bases, whether they're nationwide. So just thinking, what are some common struggles? What are the things we really want to target? And that'll kind of help with figuring out the program goals and objectives. So what are we trying to better? Are we trying to increase just overall GPAs? Are we kind of increase buy-in for academics? What are we trying to kind of accomplish here? And figuring out the objectives of how we get there. So the step-by-step processes, and then also program intensity. And so I think that came into a big play, especially with the transfers, how intense we were going to really go at programming, really understanding that they are at different places. And so not wanting to lose them by having to make it super, super intense and not doing enough where it's not intense enough that it feels like it's having an impact. So where is that happy medium? How intense does the program need to be? Whereas we may have freshmen who college is totally new for them. And so it's like, maybe we should be pretty intense and pretty intentional with that piece of them being here 5 days a week, just because we know they're in a totally new realm. And so those are just kind of some questions. There's definitely more to consider, but kind of the top questions to think about when we're thinking about putting together intentional programming.
So the next step would be designating your point person. And so Morgan and I have both kind of been designated, myself for the freshmen. Morgan kind of took over the transfers in terms of this support programming and intentional programming for that population. And so really finding that designated point person and looking at two things when we're finding that person that would be the right fit. We're looking at the who and the why. And so when it comes down to the who, again, it doesn't need to be a full-time staff member. It's a really good opportunity to utilize any graduate assistants that you have, any interns that you have, academic coaches or mentors, whatever it is at your institution. It can be a full-time staff, but it might be a really good opportunity for someone who is a part-time staff to step into that experience, to also build their own experiences as well and have that on their resume. But really looking at the strengths of that individual, what do they bring to the table and how can they benefit this program? How can they elevate it? What are their strengths that are going to help the student athletes, that population of student athletes, to grow, develop, and be better as people? Looking at growth opportunities as well. So maybe there is an intern or a graduate assistant who has been more on the administrative side of things. They haven't really gotten the opportunity to work with student athletes firsthand. That might be a growth opportunity for you to really help them to develop as well. And so it's not just developing our student athletes, but if that right fit is an intern or a graduate assistant, it's also a great opportunity to help them grow in the field as well. So in that same vein, thinking about the goals and the passions of the person that might be the designated point person. And so if you have, again, I'm going to go with an intern or a graduate assistant, and their goal is to be in this field, to grow in this field, to be a full-time advisor and continue to move up. That might be a really good opportunity for them because you know that that's something that they're passionate about. If it's someone that's just kind of, trying to use their internship and go into a completely different field, it might be a good opportunity, but how invested are they truly going to be in the program if they're just thinking that they might completely switch up their career field moving forward? And so really thinking about all those things, thinking about the student athletes, as well as who you're going to put in this position, how they can really take it to the next level and elevate it. When thinking about the why just have one designated point person for freshmen? Why not split them up by position group? Why not have them check in with 3 different advisors? That used to be the model here. And then our associate director really decided to switch it up into this way to focus on the freshman population and now the transfer population, which has really been a phenomenal transition for our student athletes. It allows them to have a level of consistency that they maybe didn't have before because they are focused on checking in and going to one person for that first semester. It gives them a different amount of support in terms of having someone that's focused on their transition as well, personally as well as academically, and just the amount of, like Morgan said, intensity that's going into the programming and the support behind it wasn't always the case before in terms of that freshman population. It also gives them a sense of community, knowing that they're just checking in with that one person, because they all can say, oh, when's your check-in meeting? I'll come to your check-in meeting and then we can go to your check-in meeting. So giving them that sense of community where the freshmen really seem super bonded because they are together every single day, whether it's in study hall or swag or check-in meetings with myself, they're truly together all the time. I don't ever see one alone. And then also just curriculum familiarity. So having that one person that really knows that freshman curriculum off their heart and knows exactly what classes to put them in, regardless of different majors, to avoid certain holds if you have at your certain institution. I know if we don't take certain classes by a certain time, their freshman year, holds are put on here at LSU. And so really having that one person that knows the curriculum for that first year and knows how to set them up for their sophomore, junior, senior grad years is a reason why we're designating a point person. And then step 3, locking in the logistics, because this didn't really just happen overnight. There's a lot of things that go into it. And so when you're thinking about things to consider, for me with the FAST program specifically, it started with an idea, but then it started with, okay, let's put it on paper. Let's create a manual. Let's have a first draft. Let's have all these drafts, and then let's finally launch it. And so that's not something that took a week. That was probably a solid 6-month process to get everything right. It was, I think, pretty closed in before, and then being able to make it super broad and focus on a lot more aspects than initially I personally had thought of for this program. And so after that, constructing an orientation schedule, because that's the first step. And so working to make sure that you set out that week schedule and that everything kind of works with practice times, with class times, especially for that mid-year population that comes in, that rolls right into things. Our summer guys, we have a little bit more flexibility with because they're not necessarily in 5 classes every day and having solid workouts for, 2-3 hours. And so really constructing that orientation schedule, establishing study hall times. This is something that we try to do before locking in classes if we possibly can, just so that we can avoid conflicts and issues, because we want all of our young student athletes, freshman student athletes, to be in study hall and not have to have a conflict. Obviously things come up and major specific conflicts are a thing, but trying to establish that study hall time is going to be super important, especially with building that sense of community and making sure that you have available tutors and whatnot. The next, organizing guest speakers for transfers and for freshmen, for workshops and for swag. This is also a really good opportunity to build your network as a point person and also explore campus resources and build connections on campus or in the community. And so organizing guest speakers, and then oftentimes I know personally for my programming, I've been able to reuse guest speakers for each semester because I've built that relationship with them and they're excited to come back and talk to our student athletes. Another aspect is indicating who makes a learning specialist caseload. And so that's where the learning profiles come in and making sure that we are figuring out what individual student athletes will be meeting with a learning specialist and how that is going to factor into their time in the academic center and, fit in between classes and work with the learning specialist caseload and their schedule. So that's a big part of things too, that falls more on our ESS, our educational support services side. But obviously we work very closely hand in hand to support our student athletes. Another aspect is setting check-in meeting times, which I know Morgan can attest to this. It takes about 5 times to make sure that every single student athlete can fit into your schedule around your meetings. And then a meeting has changed and then you gotta reassess. So making sure that you're setting those times that are going to work for your student athletes and be convenient for them, but also convenient for you is going to be important. Then identifying groups and tutors. This can be sometimes tricky, sometimes not. Looking at the group of student athletes that you have and making sure that you're balancing out those groups. We try to do this before they get here, but obviously then sometimes changes are had to be made just because you see certain dynamics between certain student athletes where maybe they're not as productive with their best friend in that group, and you didn't know they were best friends before when you grouped them together. And so making sure that you're identifying those groups and being as productive as possible within those sessions, and then finding the right tutor for that population or that group that they have. So maybe you have a group with a couple student athletes that need a little bit more attention. And so finding a tutor that really could work with those student athletes while also having the ability to, check in with the other student athletes within the room is going to be super important. And then for Morgan, specifically for SCORE, making sure Canvas is set up. I know there was a lot of time and effort spent into building a Canvas for our transfer student athletes, and they really have it up and rolling. But again, did not happen overnight. And then laying out the task sheet deadline. And so we make sure that with all of our student athletes, we have a pretty firm deadline so that they can't miss it. We're sending reminders. We're making sure that when we see them, they're filling it out and whatnot and giving it back to us so that we can also send those out to the appropriate stakeholders that those student athletes work with. And then when it comes to the next step, we're really then looking at the implementation and personalization of our programming after all the logistics have been set and whatnot. So it's time for action now, and that doesn't always run as smoothly as you hope, but we try to make it work the best that we possibly can. And by doing this, we're also personalizing the program. So considerations to think about: knowing your population. Not one class of student athletes is going to be the exact same as another class, and not each individual is going to be the exact same as another individual. And so I know specifically for me, the summer group of student athletes that are freshmen that came in, completely different than my mid-year group of student athletes that came in. Both great, but just different, right? And so knowing that population and knowing how to adjust yourself and adapt the programming and making it personalized that fits them the best possible way is going to be extremely important. And then also looking at, obviously, the individualized support plan. Yes, we have an overarching program that all of our freshmen and our transfer student athletes go through. But at the end of the day, each student athlete is unique, has different needs, and we need to meet them where they're at. And so making sure that they're going through the programming, but we're making it individualized at the same time to, again, adjust and adapt to them and help them be successful, whatever that looks like for that individual student athlete, not for the entire group. Also, things to consider: mid-year versus summer enrollees. Didn't know how different it was going to be until we hit the ground running, but it's been great. Just being able to kind of shift and pay attention to both those populations. I know a specific example for me is our summer enrollees, like I had mentioned, they have a little bit more time to adjust and adapt with, that SAS program, the summer bridge program, orientation. They're only taking one class during a session, whereas our mid-year guys come in at the beginning or the middle of January, and we are into 5 classes, and they're learning the playbook, and they're still adjusting, and they've never been away from home before, and still, so basically giving them that support that they need to really, they don't have that buffer room. And so there's some things that might have to be put on the back burner, whereas our summer enrollees were able to get things done during the summer in terms of like the ALEX, our math placement test. Our summer enrollees had so much time to focus on that throughout the summer, whereas our mid-year guys, having to adjust to 5 classes and the athletic piece and balancing those responsibilities, didn't have time to do that initially as soon as they got in. And so we kind of had to wait till we got through midterms, and now we're kind of focusing on that so that they're set up for their math courses moving forward. And then another aspect to consider when personalizing a program is really prioritizing and remaining modern. And so like I had just mentioned, prioritizing what needs to be prioritized. There's some things that sometimes need to be put on the back burner, and then keeping it modern so that you're also keeping the engagement of the student athletes within that population.
Yeah, and I think really going off of the personalization tip is where the next part comes in about the flexibility and reevaluation. So we talk about the individual support plans, and that essentially we have a framework, we have a skeleton, but that it should look different semester to semester. It should look different for each student. And so if I have one student, especially with transfers, because they're on a vast spectrum of like, this is my second semester, or like, no, I have like one semester left after this. So they're everywhere. And so knowing what works for who, if I have one transfer student athlete that does hit all 3 study hall days and they check in with me twice a week, and then sometimes they need extra study hall, but then I may have one that literally makes it to 1 study hall a week and only has 1 check-in and they're thriving. So I think that's where the intentionality piece comes into, of knowing your students and knowing, yes, we have this skeleton, but also being able to be flexible and have that individual kind of unique support for each of them. And so that brings us to kind of being flexible and evaluation. So the flexibility piece, I think, is really big between FAST and SCORE. I know with SCORE being very new and this being the first semester, there was a lot of, like I like to call it, pivoting. So basically making those necessary shifts and changes in real time. And I think that is a lot of due to unforeseen circumstances or like struggling with buy-in. I know for the transfers, when they first got here, when they saw the SCORE program, they saw like, oh, I have to do study hall, I have to have check-in, like I have this, all this structure, right? And not knowing where they may have come from or what it looked like before. They're so far down their like academic path. Like I'm a junior, so I don't really have all that structure anymore. I feel like a freshman, all these things. So we're getting all these kind of like pushback. And so I'm like, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to pivot to kind of get that buy-in? So I think it was like our 3rd academic workshop was coming up, and it was making that decision of, you know what, instead of doing this, we're really gonna kind of focus more of like visions and goals workshop for them to think of like their why am I here, kind of getting them to get that perspective and understanding why they're doing everything they're doing, right? Like I have study hall and I'm a junior, so maybe it's not just about getting my things done. Maybe it's more about teaching me discipline and time management and things like that. So really making the pivots and shifts that need to happen in real time, because I think that's what makes it intentional, unique to each of the set of students that you have, or any unforeseen circumstances. I think out of the 8 modules we have for workshops, 2 ended up being virtual, where we did everything online because of other different circumstances. And so I think being able to pivot, being able to change in real time is very important, and what makes it more personal and intentional, even for the student athletes themselves, because they notice. And so with that, I think we always want to have an evaluation process no matter what we're doing. And so I think at the mid-semester and semester point, and so even it doesn't always have to be formal. I think for even with SCORE, it gets very busy with everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. So at that mid-semester point, I'm really thinking, okay, as a point person, what are things that I'm hearing? What am I seeing that's working? What's not? And like, how do I pivot mid-semester to try to make things work? And so even whether it's informal or it's formal, as I have a whole sheet that they're going to fill out at the end of the semester with their favorite parts of SCORE and what they don't like so much, really making sure you're evaluating, because again, every semester, every group of student athletes will look different. And so their time in FAST or SCORE should look different. While we're holding to the overall framework, we want to make sure we're intentional and that it's unique and that they're getting everything that they kind of need. And so for us, I think that's the 5 kind of steps that we would take. Again, we just kind of wanted to provide a skeleton of how you can kind of start and definitely build upon anything that we mentioned here today. And so with that, we want to thank you all for coming and open the floor for questions.
A question that was in the chat was, do you use a specific program for your learning profile?
We do. That falls more on our educational support services side, but they go through the RAT assessment that they use. And so again, that focuses on the writing piece of things, the reading, as well as a math component that they go through. And then there's also another component that they use called the VARC that focuses more on how they like to learn. So do they like to learn by listening to things? Do they like to learn by actually being hands-on? And so we're focusing on a lot of different things when it comes to our learning profile. It's not a quick 15 to 30 minute assessment. It takes some time. Altogether, it probably takes about 2 hours to get through the initial screening and assessments that our learning profiles do, and that our learning specialists are, trained and equipped to work with our student athletes to establish.
Thank you. Another question that was asked in the chat is kind of twofold. So did you find that the 1 hour study hall meetings each day was more effective and productive? And does this change if the freshman or transfer student does not perform well in that first semester?
I'll take that one first.
Yeah. And so I think that I found, at least for the transfers, I can speak that I think that the 1 hour does work. I think it's honestly more than enough for them. Again, because of where they all are academically and even mentally, like they know, like I'm a junior. So even if I only have 50 minutes in here, I can go home and get my work done, or I would rather go home and get my work done. They very much don't like to feel like, oh, like, why am I doing all this? I feel like a freshman. And so I think for them, it works in that, okay, we have some structure, but for them to still feel that autonomy and that like they can take care of their academics. So I think the 1 hour piece works well. And I think there was another part to it.
It was just, does it change if they don't do well in that first semester?
Yes. So at least for the transfers, and then if you want to do it for the freshmen, I think the preface that I set for them was, okay, here's where we are with study hall starting out the semester. But if we are falling behind, if we're not doing what we're supposed to do at any point in time, that can change. We can increase it, whether it's independent study hall, whether it's that you stay a little bit after that 1 hour. So I think it's constantly, if they're not hitting the marks they need to hit, it is constantly kind of changing, adding, subtracting, kind of editing where it's necessary.
Yeah, and I can speak to the freshmen. 1 hour a day, 5 days a week doesn't seem like a lot of time, especially for that freshman population. And, you know, sometimes it takes a while to log into a computer and then we have class after, so we're leaving 10 minutes early. So what we really try to do is our freshman student athletes, especially our mid-year student athletes, they have more than just that study hall time. They're set up with learning specialists if that is something that they require, but they're also utilizing strategy tutors to have that additional time as well. But we're also focusing on encouraging them to get work done at home as well, to focus on that, that approach of, you know, you shouldn't have to be in the academic center every single day from your freshman to your senior year. You should be able to work on your own and get stuff done. Obviously, there's some exceptions to that, but we're encouraging that. But the hour study hall time, at least for the freshmen, has proved to be fairly productive, but they do have more time on top of that. It's not just an hour of study hall. The check-in meetings are used for task sheets as well, like Morgan said. And so that's something that doesn't necessarily have to be done during that study hall time. And then as it refers to, you know, how their progress is going in their academics, the way that I explain it to them from their first semester until their second semester is there is an opportunity for next semester for you to only have Monday, Wednesday, Friday of study hall, an hour for 3 days a week. However, that will depend on how you finish up this semester. And if you aren't successful during your first semester, you know, you likely will be in 5 days a week. So again, that individualized approach and that flexibility, as Morgan mentioned, is kind of how we address it with the freshmen as well.
Okay, a couple questions as we wrap this thing up. Does the SCORE program include graduate student transfers? So that's one. Two, how many learning specialists and counselors do we have on staff, and what is the counselor to student ratio?
I think the first part. Yeah. And so that is a good question. So currently they are not necessarily directly in SCORE. And so I think that's also been interesting with this being a pilot first semester with it. I think that if it called for it, depending on who the transfer was, how they're doing, there's always room to add it. I think the idea behind them being grad transfers, having gotten that degree, there's a level of trust there that they'll be able to get what they need to get done. But I think there's always room if it is necessary to add them in.
Yeah, and we have a lot of individuals on staff, which we're very fortunate to have, because it takes a village, as we all know, and there's so many hands on deck when it comes to supporting our young men, and we're very appreciative of that. So we have one math specialist, which it has been great, especially when it comes to all of our changing math curriculum here at LSU. We have 4 full-time learning specialists that are working with our student athletes. 2 graduate assistants, 2 interns, 3 full-time staff. So there's a lot of hands on deck. I don't have the ratio offhand right now, but I know between my 2 classes, specifically of freshmen, I probably have about 26 on scholarship. And so that's kind of my caseload of student athletes.
Great. Okay. Two final questions. When do you find the time to schedule these workshops to take place so all of your students can attend them? And then what does the transition of advisors look like after their freshman year? And are there challenges with that transition?
Great question.
Okay, so take the first part. And so the workshops, we try to intentionally do it at the same time as study hall. So when the study hall time was set, we set the workshop time. So usually if they're having a workshop, it's taking place at a study hall hour. It's always on Monday from 2:30 to 3:30. And so they all kind of have that as an opening. And so we kind of keep it with that time. So once we know that the study hall hour is set where they will all be able to attend, we kind of do all the workshops at that time as much as possible. Of course, we've had to pivot. I think we moved one to like a Tuesday at 3. But again, it's kind of looking at their schedule. Where is that window that at least the majority can hit? And so I think we've had much success with essentially all of them being at all the academic workshops, trying to keep that consistent kind of date and time.
Very similar to Morgan with the freshmen. It's during study hall time. We pull from twice a month, and some weeks that can be a little bit harder than others when it's a cramed week, and that's not something that we necessarily expected before we set all these meeting times. But for the freshmen, it's Wednesdays at 12:30 when they're already in there for study hall. Same thing. We already know that they're going to be there, and instead of trying to get them to come back for another hour and pulling teeth to do that. Jordy, please remind me of the second question.
What is the transition like between advisors from freshman year and the year after?
Perfect. Thank you.
And are there challenges?
Yeah. So we've only kind of gone through the transition once now with our mid-years from last year, and there was only 5. And so in my opinion, it's been a great transition. Our assistant director works with our offense upperclassmen, sophomores and above, and our associate director works with our defense, same thing, sophomore and above. And so we all make it a priority to get to know all of the student athletes, regardless if they're on our caseload or not. And so I think that helps them knowing every single person that works with our team and putting a face to the name and, checking in on them when they're around. That way, when it is time for that transition and, they're not a freshman anymore and they're not necessarily checking in with me, I still see them around and we can have a conversation and check in, but they feel comfortable to go to their advisor, their next advisor to check in and go through more of the formal process of advising and whatnot. So in my opinion, it's been a great transition and process so far. I haven't witnessed any challenges, but it's definitely something that in the beginning you think, how is that transition going to be? What is that going to look like? But personally, I think it's been phenomenal.
Thank you guys so much. Y'all go to the next slide. Please submit your evaluations of this presentation. Thank you guys so much for coming and attending. Just go ahead, scan the QR code with your phone, submit the evaluation. Don't forget to stop by the Navigating NIL during the lunch seminar at 12:30.